The first lie I was taught was that silence keeps you safe. Not the silence of peace, but the thick, obedient silence that presses against your chest when you are a child, and learn very early which questions must never be spoken aloud. I grew up believing that God listened most closely when we said nothing at all. The Ordnung did not need to shout. It breathed through every board of our houses, every unpainted wall, every button sewn by hand onto our dark clothes. It was there when the rooster cried before dawn, and it was there when the lantern flame trembled at night, as if even the light feared to move too much. I am an Amish man. I was born one, baptized one, and for most of my life I believed I would die one without ever truly looking back. We were taught that the world outside was loud, fractured, poisoned by pride. They called it the English world, as if naming it made it smaller, less dangerous. Yet even as a boy, I sensed something dishonest in how carefully that world was avoided. You do not guard a door so fiercely unless you fear what might be waiting on the other side. Our days followed a rhythm older than memory: the creak of leather harnesses, the slow breathing of horses in the barn, the smell of damp hay and manure mixing with fresh bread cooling on wooden tables. Women moved like shadows in kitchens, hands rough, voices low. Men spoke little, and when they did, it was with the confidence of people who believed the rules had already been written by God Himself. Ordnung was not just law, it was identity. To question it was to risk becoming nothing. As a child, I learned obedience before language. I learned how to bow my head, how to avert my eyes, how to swallow curiosity until it burned like an unspoken sin. We did not have mirrors, but I knew my face from the faces around me: plain, restrained, disciplined into sameness. Individuality was treated like rot, something that spreads if not cut away early. I remember the first time fear truly settled into my bones. I was 9. A cousin had been caught with something forbidden, hidden beneath loose boards in the barn. No one said what it was, only that it came from outside. The punishment was quiet but absolute. He was shunned. Overnight, he became invisible. At meals, his place was empty. In the fields, his absence was louder than any scream. I learned then that exile did not require distance, it required silence. What outsiders never see is how heavy that silence becomes, how it presses down until even your thoughts feel watched. We were taught that technology was not evil in itself, only dangerous to humility. Pride, they said, is the first crack in the soul. Cars make you fast. Electricity makes you comfortable. Comfort makes you forget God. That was the logic. Repeated so often, it hardened into truth. But logic does not kill curiosity. It only drives it underground. At night, lying on my straw mattress, I listened to the wind scrape against the house and imagined other sounds beyond it. Voices carried through wires, light summoned with a switch, knowledge arriving instantly instead of traveling by word of mouth like a rumor. I hated myself for those thoughts. I prayed for forgiveness before the sin had even been committed. By the time I reached adulthood, I understood the real reason we rejected modern life. It was not because it was sinful, it was because it made leaving easier. A man with a car can drive away. A man with a phone can hear another version of truth. A man with choices can decide that the Ordnung is not God's voice, but a human one, trembling with fear. Still, I stayed. I married. I worked the fields. I bowed my head and spoke the right words. From the outside, I was faithful. From the inside, something was loosening, thread by thread. And the night I finally touched the forbidden world, I did not know yet that the price would be far higher than curiosity. I only knew that once you look back, truly look, there is no returning to the silence that once kept you safe. The first time I heard electricity, it sounded like an insect trapped inside the walls of the world. I was 22, standing at the edge of a property line I had crossed 100 times before, without noticing. The fence was the same, the trees were the same, but something beyond them hummed with a life that did not belong to us. It was late evening, the sky bruised purple, and I had been sent to deliver produce to an English neighbor as part of an arrangement the bishops tolerated but never discussed. My horse shifted nervously, ears twitching, as if it sensed the trespass before I did. Inside the English house, light spilled without flame. It filled every corner, without smoke, without wick, without prayer. I remember the smell first. Warm metal, soap too sharp to be honest, air that felt thinner somehow. The man spoke kindly, too kindly, and his wife smiled in a way that showed teeth without shame. I kept my hat on. I kept my eyes down. That was how we survived encounters like this, by turning ourselves into guests who could not see. Then I heard it, a low constant vibration, barely audible but persistent. It ran through the walls, through the floor, into my feet. Power, I would later learn. At that moment, it felt like standing beside something alive that did not care whether God approved of it or not. They offered me water from the tap. I refused. They offered me a chair. I declined. Every gesture felt like a test. The Ordnung teaches you that temptation arrives gently, disguised as kindness. I repeated my father's words in my head like a psalm: humility, separation, obedience. Still, my eyes betrayed me. They lifted, they lingered. On a table near the window lay a small black rectangle, silent, innocent. I did not know its name yet, but I knew it was forbidden. It sat there like a secret waiting to be spoken. The man noticed my glance and followed it, then laughed softly. He picked it up, pressed something with his thumb, and suddenly the rectangle came alive. Light bloomed, voices spilled out. A woman sang from nowhere, her voice clear and aching, as if she were standing in the room with us. I froze. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might collapse. This was not curiosity anymore. This was transgression. I do not remember leaving, only that I was suddenly outside again, the night air heavy with crickets and manure, the familiar smells wrapping around me like forgiveness. I climbed into the buggy with shaking hands. The horse snorted, impatient to go, and I urged him forward faster than was proper. All the way home the song followed me, echoing in my head, a sound that had crossed miles without a body to carry it. That night I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the knots in the wood, trying to pray the melody out of my mind. But prayer felt thin. For the first time, I understood something dangerous. The world we rejected was not empty. It was full, overfull, and we had chosen hunger. In the days that followed, I watched my community with new eyes. The way we corrected children with a glance instead of words. The way laughter stopped abruptly when an elder entered the room. The way no one ever admitted doubt, even when it flickered plainly behind their eyes. I began to see Ordnung not as divine instruction, but as a fragile wall, constantly reinforced because it was always close to cracking. I also began to notice who watched me. The bishops did not accuse. They never needed to. Suspicion here moved like a shadow, quiet but precise. A question asked twice. A pause held too long. My wife noticed first. She asked if I was ill. I told her I was tired. It was a half-truth, and half-truths are the most dangerous kind. At night, I started walking to the edge of our land, standing where the hum was faint but present. I told myself I was listening for weather, for animals, for signs from God. But I knew better. I was listening for the world I had heard once, and could not forget. We are taught that once you step outside the Ordnung, even in thought, the community feels it, like a body sensing infection. I did not believe that before. I believe it now, because one evening, as I turned back toward home, I saw a lantern moving toward me across the field, slow and deliberate, and I understood with sudden clarity that my silence was no longer protecting me. When the lantern stopped moving, I knew they had already decided something about me. Light in our world is never accidental. A lantern carried across a field after dark means concern, correction, or judgment. I stood still, the grass wet against my boots, my breath loud in my ears. The hum from beyond the property line seemed suddenly closer, as if it were leaning in to listen. When the figure stepped into the glow, I recognized the gate before the face. It was Eli, one of the deacons, a man whose voice never rose and never needed to. He did not ask why I was there. He did not accuse me of anything. That was the cruelty of it. He simply said my name, slowly, the way you say it when you are about to change its meaning. Then he asked if I was well. I answered yes. He nodded, as if he had expected that lie. We walked back together without speaking, the lantern swinging between us, casting our shadows long and distorted on the ground. From that night on, I felt the eyes, not openly, not constantly, but enough to know I was no longer invisible. In a place where conformity is survival, being noticed is its own kind of threat. Conversations ended when I approached. Invitations thinned. Even my wife grew quieter, her questions softer, as if she feared that speaking them aloud might summon something neither of us was ready to face. We tell outsiders that Amish life is peaceful. In many ways, it is. But peace maintained through fear has a taste to it. Dry, metallic, lingering. Every rule in the Ordnung is explained as protection, yet the punishments are designed to wound without blood. Shunning is not violence, they say. It is discipline. But when a man's own mother refuses to pass him the salt, when his children are told to look through him as if he were already dead, the effect is the same. I had seen it before. I had never imagined it for myself. The irony is that the Ordnung does not forbid curiosity directly. It forbids the tools that make curiosity dangerous. We can wonder as long as we remain powerless to act on it. Horses keep us slow. No wires mean no voices entering uninvited. No images beyond what our eyes can see. Control is easier when the horizon is short, and yet the world leaks in. It always has. Through business arrangements, through tourists who stare at us like artifacts and leave pamphlets behind by accident or design, through young men during Rumspringa who taste freedom and come back quieter than before, carrying something heavy behind their eyes. I began to notice the cracks. A neighbor who owned a diesel generator for emergencies that ran more often than storms justified. A boy who knew too much about places he had never been. A bishop who spoke harshly about pride but accepted donations from English companies with a humility that looked suspiciously like comfort. At night, I dreamed of light without flame. I dreamed of voices speaking directly to me, asking nothing, demanding nothing. I woke with guilt soaked into my sheets. Prayer no longer brought relief. It felt like repetition without connection, words spoken into a space that refused to answer. Then came the meeting. They called it a council, but it was not for discussion. I sat on a hard bench, hands folded, while the bishops spoke in turns, their voices blending into something practiced and smooth. They did not mention the English house. They did not mention electricity or devices or songs. They spoke instead about humility, about the dangers of drifting, about how even a faithful man can become lost if he listens too closely to his own thoughts. They asked if I felt at peace with the Ordnung. I hesitated, only for a moment, but in that room, a moment is enough. I said yes. My voice did not shake. That may have been my second mistake. Afterward, Eli walked with me again. He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy, grounding. He said the community loved me. He said love sometimes requires attention. I thanked him. Gratitude is another form of silence. What I did not tell anyone was that I had already crossed another line. Weeks earlier, I had found something left behind near the boundary of our land, a thing small enough to fit in my palm, black, silent, waiting. I had hidden it beneath a loose board in the barn, where the smell of animals covered everything. I told myself it was only to understand. Understanding, after all, is not rebellion. But every night, as I lay awake, listening to the wind and the distant hum, I knew the truth. I was no longer afraid of being seen. I was afraid of being discovered before I was ready to choose. And the night I finally turned the device on, the light it made was bright enough to expose far more than I had ever intended. The glow was obscene in its clarity. In a barn built to swallow shadows, the light from that small screen felt like a confession shouted into God's ear. It illuminated dust hanging in the air, each particle suspended like evidence. My hands shook so badly I had to brace my elbows against my knees. For a long moment, I only stared, afraid that if I moved, the Ordnung itself would materialize behind me and place a hand on my neck. I did not know how the device worked. I only knew what it was capable of. I pressed where the Englishman had pressed. The screen awakened again. Obedient, unafraid, images poured out, faces, places, words moving faster than any sermon I had ever endured. A world unfiltered by elders or bishops. A world where information did not ask permission. The first thing I searched for was us. It is a strange thing, seeing your life described by strangers. They spoke of simplicity like it was a fashion choice. They spoke of peace as if it were effortless. They photographed our homes, our women, our children, freezing them into something consumable. No one mentioned the fear. No one mentioned the silence. No one mentioned how obedience feels when it is no longer freely given. I should have stopped. I should have shut it off, buried it deeper, burned it. Instead, I kept going. Curiosity turned into hunger with alarming speed. I read stories of men who left and never returned. Some were called brave, others were called lost. A few were simply erased, their names swallowed by the noise of the outside world. I felt envy, then shame for feeling it. What frightened me most was not what I learned about the English world, but what I learned about my own. The Ordnung, I discovered, was not a single ancient law handed down untouched. It changed, quietly, slowly. Rules adjusted, technologies permitted or denied based on decisions made in rooms like the one I had sat in, by men who claimed divine guidance but argued like any others. The certainty I had been raised on began to feel carefully maintained rather than eternal. Time vanished. I did not hear the barn door until it creaked. I killed the screen instantly, plunging myself back into darkness. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might betray me. Footsteps moved across the packed dirt floor, unhurried. The smell of wool and lantern oil reached me before the light did. When the flame bloomed, it caught my face mid-breath. It was my wife. She did not scream, she did not speak. Her eyes moved from my face to my hands, then to the loose board at my feet. Understanding settled over her expression like frost. In that moment, I realized the cruelty of my secrecy. I had not only endangered myself, I had dragged her to the edge, without asking if she wanted to look down. She asked me one question, not what it was, not how long. She asked whether I was planning to leave. I could not answer. We stood there in the barn, surrounded by animals who did not care about Ordnung or salvation or exile. The lantern flickered. Somewhere beyond the fields, the hum continued, indifferent. I saw fear in her eyes, but not the kind I expected. It was not fear of God. It was fear of being left alone inside a world that does not forgive deviation. That night, we did not touch each other. We lay awake, backs turned, listening to the house breathe around us. In the morning, she milked the cows as always. I went to the fields. From the outside, nothing had changed. But silence between two people who share a secret is different. It stretches, it presses, it demands resolution. Word travels faster than truth in a closed community. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the distance between us, the way her eyes searched my face before she spoke, the way I flinched at every unexpected sound. The Ordnung survives on observation. Nothing unusual goes unnoticed for long. 3 days later, Eli came again. He did not carry a lantern this time. He carried certainty. He told me the bishops wished to see me after Sunday service. He said it gently. He said it like a kindness. As he walked away, I felt the weight of the device hidden in the barn, the weight of knowledge in my head, the weight of my wife's silence beside me. I understood then that there are moments when faith and obedience demand opposite things, and I had only one night left to decide which voice I would obey. Sunday morning arrived with the sound of boots on gravel and a sky too clear to be kind. Church days always carried a particular tension, but this one felt sharpened, deliberate. The benches were filled, the air thick with wool, soap, and restrained anticipation. I sat beside my wife, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to know she was guarding herself. When the hymns began, the familiar melodies felt foreign in my mouth, as if I were reciting words in a language I no longer believed I spoke fluently. The bishops watched me without appearing to. That is a skill learned over decades. Attention without acknowledgement, authority without overt force. After the final prayer, Eli met my eyes and nodded once. It was time. They took me into the small room behind the meeting house, bare except for a table and 4 chairs. The door closed softly. No lock. None was needed. The eldest bishop spoke first, his voice calm, almost tender. He asked how my spirit fared. He asked if my household was at peace. These questions were not meant to be answered honestly. They were meant to measure how well I could still perform obedience. Then he asked if I had brought anything into my life that might disturb the Ordnung. The room seemed to contract. I thought of the barn, of the loose board, of the light. I thought of my wife's face in that moment of understanding, the way love and fear had collided in her eyes. I could lie. Many had before me. Lies keep the community intact. Truth fractures it. I asked for time. Silence followed, dense and heavy. Time in our world is a dangerous request. It implies choice. The bishops exchanged glances too subtle for an outsider to notice, but I had been raised to read them. Finally, the eldest nodded. 1 week, he said. 1 week to pray, to reflect, to return with clarity. As I left the room, I understood the mercy for what it was, a test, or a trap. That night, my wife spoke first. She said she had been thinking of her mother, of how she had once whispered questions at night and then learned never to do it again. She said she was afraid, not of God, but of losing everyone she had ever known in a single breath. I listened. I did not interrupt. For the first time, I realized how little space the Ordnung leaves for women's doubt. Men are corrected, women are erased. I told her what I had seen. Not everything. Enough. Her hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. She asked what I wanted. The question cut deeper than the bishop's interrogation. Want is a language we are not taught. Over the next days, I moved through my life like a man already half gone. Every sound felt heightened. The snap of laundry in the wind, the lowing of cattle, the laughter of children running barefoot through dust, unaware of how conditional their belonging truly was. I wondered how many men before me had stood at this edge, convinced they were alone, when in truth they were simply silent. On the 6th night, I returned to the barn. I powered the device one last time. I read until my eyes burned, not about escape routes or cities or money, but about others like me, former Amish, men and women who had loved their communities and still walked away. Some spoke of freedom, others spoke of regret, none spoke of return. I shut it off and sat in the dark. listening to my own breathing. Outside, a car passed on the distant road, its headlights briefly cutting through the field like a blade. The horse shifted in his stall, unbothered. Animals do not understand borders. At dawn, I buried the device deep, farther than before. Not because I had chosen to stay, not because I had chosen to leave, but because I understood something at last. The Ordnung does not forgive hesitation. It demands alignment. When Sunday came again, I dressed carefully. My wife stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders longer than necessary. She did not ask what I would say. Some questions are too heavy to be spoken. As I walked toward the meeting house, I felt the eyes already on me, measuring, waiting. I knew that whatever words I offered would shape not only my future, but hers. And as I reached for the door, I realized with terrifying clarity that the most dangerous thing I carried with me was not forbidden technology or secret knowledge. It was the certainty that no matter what I chose next, there would be no way to tell this story without losing someone I loved. I did not speak the words they expected. The meeting house was quiet enough to hear breathing, the collective inhale of a community trained to listen for deviation. I stood before them, hat in my hands, feeling the grain of the wood worn smooth by generations of palms just like mine. The bishops waited. My wife sat among the women, her face composed, her eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder. I understood then that whatever happened next would echo through her life, even louder than through mine. I told them the truth, but not the whole truth. That is another skill we learn early. I said I had doubts. I said I had struggled with pride, with curiosity, with thoughts that did not align neatly with the Ordnung. I did not mention the device. I did not mention the light. I spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded like repentance without offering submission. The room remained still, but the air changed. Doubt acknowledged aloud is a kind of contagion. They asked if I was willing to submit fully, to accept guidance, to correct my course. Their voices were calm, practiced, compassionate in the way a knife can be when held by a steady hand. I felt the weight of every story I had read, every man who had stood where I stood and chosen silence over fracture. I looked at my wife. For a moment, the Ordnung loosened its grip. I saw her not as a role, not as a responsibility, but as a person who had carried fear quietly for years. I realized that staying would not protect her. It would only delay the damage, stretch it thinner, teach our children that love is conditional, and belonging must be earned daily through erasure. I said I could not promise what they were asking. The words landed softly. That was the most terrifying part. There was no shouting, no dramatic condemnation. The eldest bishop nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already known. He said they would pray for me. He said the community would give me time to reconsider. Time again. Always time, until it runs out. What followed was worse than immediate judgment. It was distance. Meals eaten without us. Conversations redirected. Hands that no longer reached out in greeting. Shunning begins not as an event, but as a thinning of presence. You disappear in increments. My wife and I spoke little during those days. We did not need to. Every sound of a buggy passing without stopping, every door left unopened, answered the questions words could not. She asked me once, late at night, what life looked like beyond the fields. I told her I did not know, only that it was loud, uncertain, and full of choices that carry their own kind of fear. On the morning we left, there was no announcement, no farewell. We loaded what we could carry without attracting attention. The house stood behind us, unchanged, patient, already forgetting us. As we walked toward the road, the hum grew louder. No longer distant, no longer forbidden, it was simply there. I wish I could tell you that leaving felt like freedom immediately. It did not. It felt like falling without knowing whether there was ground below. The outside world did not welcome us gently. It did not care where we came from or what we had lost. Choice is a heavier burden than obedience, and no one prepares you for its weight. Years have passed since then. I still wake some nights expecting silence thick enough to protect me. I still feel the pull of Ordnung in moments of chaos, the temptation to trade uncertainty for structure. I understand now why the Amish rejected modern life and never looked back. Not because the world is evil, but because once you allow it in, you must live with questions that never stop asking themselves. I am telling you this, not to romanticize leaving, and not to condemn staying. I am telling you because the truth about the Amish is not simplicity or peace. It is discipline, sacrifice, and fear carefully shaped into devotion. It is a life that works precisely because it does not tolerate looking back. I looked back. And even now, standing in this world of light without flame and voices without bodies, I know something that still unsettles me more than anything I left behind. If I had stayed silent one moment longer, I might have lived an entire life without ever realizing it was not entirely my own.